He was the High King of the Noldor for the entire Second Age of Middle-earth. He would lead his people with wisdom and courage, not only seeing Sauron for who he was, but personally fighting the Dark Lord in combat during the War of the Last Alliance. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the life of Gil-galad and why he is one of the greatest of all the High Kings of the Noldor. We don't know exactly when Gil-galad was born, but we do know that he was a child at the time of the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame in 455 of the First Age. This devastating attack by the forces of Morgoth leads Gil-galad and his mother to travel to the havens of Falas. There they could remain safe under the lordship of Círdan. Gil-galad's birth name is actually Ereinion, meaning Scion of Kings. His more common name means Star of Bright Light. While we don't know who his mother was, we know his father is Orodreth, the nephew of Galadriel. It should be noted that while in the published Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, Gil-galad is said to be the son of Fingon, Christopher Tolkien stated in The Peoples of Middle-earth that this was a mistake, and that Gil-galad was actually the son of Orodreth, and Orodreth himself was the son of Angrod. While this particular genealogy raises some interesting questions regarding Finduilas remaining with her father rather than her brother and mother, we can only wonder what dynamics caused this to be. In the aftermath of the Bragollach, Orodreth would lose his stronghold of Minas Tirith to Sauron, and would also flee from the north, going to the realm of his uncle Finrod, where he becomes heir to the kingship of Nargothrond. As a result of the devastating defeat of the Union of Maethros in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad in 472, there are no more northern realms to prevent Morgoth's march across the west of Beleriand. The havens of the Falas are destroyed by Morgoth's forces the following year. Gil-galad, along with Círdan and his people, flee and establish a haven at the mouths of Sirion, as well as a refuge on the Isle of Balar. The Nirnaeth would not only cause Gil-galad to relocate, it would also be the first step leading to his much larger role in the world of the elves. In the battle, Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, is slain, leaving the crown to pass to Fingon's brother Turgon of Gondolin. Turgon and his city would last for another 38 years, until both are destroyed in the fall of Gondolin in 510. With Turgon slain, the High Kingship would have passed to Orodreth. However, Orodreth had been killed 15 years earlier in the fall of Nargothrond. This leaves Gil-galad, who could very well be less than 70 years old at the time, to become the High King of the Noldor. With their northern allies destroyed, and few free realms remaining in Beleriand, Gil-galad and Círdan maintain the refuge on the Isle of Balar during the waning days of the First Age, until the War of Wrath, when the host of Valinor, sent by the Valar, makes their 40-year war upon Morgoth. While we don't know for certain, it's possible that Gil-galad would have been involved in the War of Wrath, leading his Noldor alongside the elves, Maiar, and perhaps even some Valar of Valinor. What we do know is what he does afterward. After Beleriand is destroyed and the First Age comes to a close in 590, the Second Age begins, and Gil-galad founds the Kingdom of Lindon in the northwest region of Middle-earth. Lindon lies between the Blue Mountains and the sea, and also includes the ports around the Gulf of Lun, including Mithlond, or the Grey Havens. Many elves of Beleriand would begin the Second Age living in Gil-galad's realm. However, some would grow restless and strike out on their own. Primary among these was Celebrimbor, who leaves Lindon to establish his own realm of Ereinion in 750. Galadriel and Celeborn would also move away to live at Lake Nanuiel, before eventually making their way to Ereinion as well. Others who would leave were some of the Sindar and the Nandor, who did not wish to live under Noldorian rule due to old wrongs. These elves move east to live in either Greenwood under Thranduil's father Orofer, or they follow Amdir to establish Lorinund, which would one day be known as Lothlorien. Among those who remained in Lindon were Círdan and Gil-galad's second in command, Elrond. Gil-galad would go on ruling the realm of Lindon in relative peace over the first 9 centuries of the Second Age. Eventually, the Númenóreans, specifically Prince Aldarion, would make voyages to Middle-earth and strike up a friendship with Gil-galad. Gil-galad, clearly a very wise and perceptive ruler, gives Aldarion a letter for his father, King Tar-Meneldur, which reads, "A new shadow arises in the east. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth is stirring, and evil things wake again. Each year it gains in strength, for most men are ripe to its purpose. Not far off is the day, I judge, when it will become too great for the Eldar unaided to withstand. Therefore, whenever I behold a tall ship of the kings of men, my heart is eased. And now I make bold to seek your help. If you have any strength of men to spare, lend it to me, I beg. Your son will report to you, if you will, all our reasons. But in fine, it is his counsel, and that is ever wise, that when assault comes, as it surely will, we would seek to hold the Westlands, where still the Eldar dwell, and men of your race, whose hearts are not yet darkened. At the least we must defend Eriador, about the long rivers west of the mountains that we name Hithyglir, our chief defense. But in that mountain wall there is a great gap, southward in the land of Calenarthon, and by that way inroad from the east must come. The king will know his own needs, but if he will listen with favor to the Lord Aldarion, and support him as he may, then hope will be greater in the world. The memories of the First Age are dim, and all things in Middle-earth grow colder. Let not the ancient friendship of Eldar and Dunedain wane also. Behold, the darkness that is come is filled with hatred for us, but it hates you no less. The great sea will not be too wide for its wings, if it is suffered to come to full growth. Manwë keep you under the one, and send fair wind to your sails." Just as Gil-galad perceived a mysterious figure calling himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, attempts to make contact with Gil-galad and Círdan in Lindon. However, they do not trust him and reject this hidden form of Sauron. Sadly, Celebrimbor and the elves of Ereinion were not so cautious. As told in my Celebrimbor video, Sauron uses these elves to forge the Rings of Power, and in 1600 of the Second Age, he forges the One Ring in Mordor. Celebrimbor, now aware of the treachery, sends the 3 rings of the elves to Galadriel, Círdan, and Gil-galad for safekeeping. As Gil-galad predicted, Sauron brings his forces from the southeast, through what would one day be known as the Gap of Rohan, and in 1693, the War of the Elves and Sauron begins. Sauron invades Eriador, specifically Ereinion, seeking to claim the Rings of Power for his own. Gil-galad sends Elrond to aid the elves of Celebrimbor, while also sending messengers to Númenor in a request for help. Elrond reaches Ereinion but is unable to repel the mightier force of Sauron. Celebrimbor is slain and Ereinion is destroyed in 1697. As Elrond is in danger of being overrun, a surprise attack by the dwarves of Khazad-dûm on Sauron's rear guard enables Elrond to escape north. The dwarves retreat into their mountain and seal the doors of Durin. Meanwhile, Elrond and the survivors of Ereinion establish Imladris, or Rivendell, as a safe haven from the war. However, it would not remain safe forever. Sauron, still with a mighty force of his own, continues his march throughout Eriador, threatening to take over the entire land and destroy all in his path. However, in 1700, Númenor would come. Tar-Minastir, the 11th king of Númenor, brings a great fleet to Lindon. and with the forces of Gil-galad in the west and Elrond in the east, they defeat Sauron and drive him from Eriador. After the war, it is decided that Elrond will remain in Rivendell and serve as Gil-galad's vice-regent. At this time, the king secretly gives Elrond Vilya, his ring of power. Gil-galad and his people would be free of Sauron for quite some time after this war. However, over the coming centuries, a darkness would fall upon Numenor. Its kings would turn their backs on Gil-galad and the elves of Middle-earth, culminating with the capture of Sauron, and the Dark Lord causing the downfall of Numenor from within in 3319 of the Second Age, over 1600 years after his defeat in Eriador. The smaller faction of Númenóreans who had not fallen under Sauron's sway would flee to Middle-earth, establishing the southern realm of Gondor, and closer to Gil-galad's own lands, the northern realm of Arnor. Gil-galad becomes allies with these exiles from Numenor, and would later stand side by side with them in battle. When Sauron launches a surprise attack on Gondor in 3429, Isildur flees north to report to his father Elendil in Arnor. Elendil seeks the aid of Gil-galad, who joins him to form the last alliance of elves and men. Gil-galad leads his forces to meet Elendil at Amon-Sul, marching to Rivendell in 3431. There they would spend the next 3 years, making plans for their war and waging weapons for the assault. Gil-galad leads one force across the Misty Mountains, while Isildur leads another over the pass of Caradhras. It is said that their armies were so large that the orcs of Mordor, which Sauron had sent forth to slow their march, instead hid themselves from this alliance. As the forces meet and continue south, they are joined by elves from Lothlorien and Greenwood, as well as dwarves from Khazad-dûm. Learning of their advance, Sauron had burned the area that had once been the Garden of the Entwives in order to slow their progress. Yet Gil-galad and the army marches on. They reach Dagorlad, where, despite heavy casualties among the Mirkwood and Lorien elves, the last alliance is victorious, destroying much of Sauron's army. They continue on into Mordor, where they lay siege to the Dark Tower of Barad-dûr for the next 7 years. Finally, Sauron himself comes forth from his tower, breaking the siege with his great power. Sauron's remaining forces advance to the slopes of Orodruin, the volcanic Mount Doom. There, Gil-galad and Elendil come face to face with Sauron, with Elendil wielding Narsil and Gil-galad striking with his spear Aiglos. The two great kings throw down the Dark Lord. However, in taking down the most evil presence of the Second Age, both Elendil and Gil-galad are slain. We are told by Isildur's scroll that Gil-galad is killed by the very heat of Sauron's hand. Thus ended the life of the High King of the Noldor. Despite Elrond's right to claim the title for his own after Gil-galad's death, he never does, as there are too few Noldor remaining in Middle-earth after the Second Age. This makes Gil-galad not only the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, but also the longest serving. After having the crown thrust upon him at a young age, Gil-galad would lead his people through 3,521 years of the world, with the second most having been Fingolfin's 449 years. The great king would be remembered in the lay named The Fall of Gil-galad, of which we only hear 3 stanzas, courtesy of Samwise as they approach Weathertop. Gil-galad was an elven king. Of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor, where the shadows are. Gil-galad not only led his people to prosperity after the greatest battle the world had ever seen, but also played a pivotal role in defeating Sauron in 2 great wars of the Second Age, making him one of, if not the, greatest of the High Kings of the Noldor. As always, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Gail Elizabeth, Jim Limber Davis, Jay Breakfield, Timothy Park, Sky Carcass, Zetrock, Grand Strategy Nerd, The Dark Haired One, Salim Rahman, Wyland, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.